The beginning of the life of Saint Catherine Labouré unfolds in a setting deeply marked by rural simplicity, by faith handed down from generation to generation, and by the serenity typical of the small French villages of the 19th century. Born on May 2, 1806, in the region of Burgundy in Fin-les-Moutiers, Catherine was received into a large household where family life was interwoven with the hardship of work in the fields, but also with a sincere devotion to God and to the Most Holy Virgin. From an early age, little Catherine showed an uncommon spiritual sensitivity, guided by an interior intuition that seemed to place her in constant silent dialogue with heaven. The premature death of her mother, when she was only 9 years old, marked her soul deeply, leading her to seek in the image of Our Lady the consolation she no longer found in her mother's arms. This scene, so tender and sorrowful, would become one of the most symbolic milestones of her childhood and a sign that God was preparing something great for her life. After the death of her mother, Catherine drew even closer to the faith, and a special episode forever marked her vocation. One day, upon entering the parish church, she spontaneously went to the altar where there was an image of Our Lady. She climbed onto a small bench, embraced the statue, and said with a firm and innocent voice, "From now on, you will be my mother." This simple and pure gesture not only revealed her deeply Marian heart, but also foreshadowed the mission that heaven would entrust to her years later. From that moment on, Catherine began to cultivate an even more intense devotion to the Virgin Mary, finding in prayer and silence a strength that no child of her age would normally possess. The mark left by the loss of her mother was transformed into a spiritual foundation, shaping the docile and obedient heart that would be essential to welcome the heavenly messages that would be revealed to her. Life in the countryside also played a fundamental role in her formation, teaching her perseverance, humility, and the value of hard work, virtues that would become an essential part of her spirituality. Still very young, Catherine took on heavy responsibilities within the home, helping her father and siblings with household chores and in caring for the farm. There was no room for comforts or distractions. Her day was marked by the rhythm of the animals, by the cultivation of the crops, and by family obligations that demanded constant physical effort. However, far from complaining, Catherine transformed every task into prayer, offering her simple gestures to God with a serenity that impressed those who knew her. Little by little, the frail girl revealed a surprising maturity filled with silence, courage, and kindness. Catherine's personality always drew attention because of her reserve and because of a depth that hid behind her discreet appearance. She was not talkative, nor did she attract glances by exuberance. She preferred to observe, listen, and act without fuss. It was as if she understood from an early age that interior life is worth more than the applause of the world. This quietness, so rare in youth, allowed her soul to remain always open to grace. Even without extensive studies, something common to women of that time, Catherine absorbed the faith through oral tradition, family religious practices, and the example of the priests and consecrated women she knew. Her spiritual intelligence was manifested not through words, but through a constant, silent, and faithful love. Catherine's adolescence was marked by an intense desire for religious life, a desire that grew in secret, nourished by prayer and contemplation. She realized that her heart did not fit the common ambitions of the young women of her age, who dreamed of advantageous marriages or a more comfortable life. On the contrary, Catherine longed for something she could not fully express, but which she felt in the deepest part of her soul, a discreet yet insistent call from God. This call, although clear to her, did not find immediate support in her family, especially because her father saw religious life as a loss and a painful separation. Thus Catherine kept this desire in her heart, waiting for God's time. Her father's resistance forced her to remain on the farm longer than she would have liked, taking on domestic roles and caring for the house with devotion and patience. Although her desire was to go to a convent, she offered this time of waiting as a sacrifice, living each day as an occasion for sanctification. Her brothers saw her as a pillar of balance within the home, someone whose presence transmitted peace. Even so, there was a deep longing for what she sensed to be her destiny, but Catherine never allowed this longing to turn into rebellion. Her heart, always obedient, was being shaped in the quiet of simple life, preparing her for a future she did not yet know, but which heaven had already written. The simple daily life of Catherine did not prevent God from speaking to her in a mysterious way. Several times she had spiritual dreams that revealed directions to her and confirmed her vocation. One of the most significant dreams occurred when she saw Saint Vincent de Paul, founder of the Daughters of Charity, inviting her to follow his path. At the time, Catherine did not yet fully understand the meaning of this vision, but something within her was deeply touched. This dream became a light amid her doubts, as if God was discreetly leading her toward the institute where she would receive one of the greatest Marian missions in the history of the Church. As the years went by, she would understand that none of these experiences had been by chance. At the age of 22, Catherine finally managed to overcome her father's resistance, thanks to the intervention of an older sister who was already a religious. With prudence and courage, she presented to her father the young Catherine's desire to follow her vocation, and after much persistence, he finally gave in. It was thus that Catherine was at last able to draw near to the path that God had illuminated for her since childhood. Her heart, until then patient and silent, overflowed with joy upon realizing that God's time had come. Her father's decision was the definitive step that would allow the young woman to enter the congregation of the Daughters of Charity in Paris. When she finally arrived at the house of the Daughters of Charity, Catherine felt immediately at peace, as if she were, for the first time, in the place to which she truly belonged. The environment of service to the poor, the spirit of humility, the simple community life, and the example of Saint Vincent de Paul were for her like a divine confirmation. What for many was merely a religious institution became for Catherine holy ground, destined to welcome one of the greatest Marian revelations in history. She entered the novitiate in 1830, a year that would be marked by extraordinary events that would change not only her life, but also Marian devotion throughout the entire world. Her period of religious formation was marked by great fervor and by an obedience that impressed her superiors. Catherine was diligent, dedicated, humble, and always ready to serve, preferring to be among the most needy rather than occupy any position that would put her in the spotlight. Her interior life blossomed in silence, and her devotion to the Virgin Mary became deeper and more mature day after day, although she still did not imagine the grand designs that God would entrust to her. Catherine lived each day as if it were the most important. And indeed it was. God was preparing her heart to receive, with purity and docility, the great mission of being the messenger of the Mother of God for the world. The serenity of religious life was only beginning to envelop the heart of Catherine Labouré when extraordinary signs began to manifest themselves in an even clearer way. From the beginning of her novitiate, she perceived that heaven wished to speak to her with ever greater intimacy, as if the Most Holy Virgin, whom she had loved deeply since childhood, were preparing the ground for a grand event. The Daughters of Charity lived a routine of prayer, work, and silence, but in the midst of this simplicity, the young Catherine experienced intense spiritual consolations, which gave her peace and, at the same time, awakened in her a profound sense of mission. It was as if her soul, already docile and sensitive, were gradually being immersed in a supernatural light that guided her in an invisible way. She herself did not know how to explain such interior movements, but recognized in them the maternal hand of the Virgin Mary. One night, however, an event would decisively mark the beginning of her mission. On July 18, 1830, on the eve of the feast of St. Vincent de Paul, Catherine awoke startled upon hearing a gentle voice calling her by name. Before her stood a mysterious boy, enveloped in an unusual light, whose countenance radiated innocence and authority at the same time. He said to her, "Come to the chapel. The Virgin awaits you." Catherine, seized by a mix of astonishment and serenity, did not hesitate. She dressed quickly and followed the boy through the dark corridors of the religious house, which mysteriously opened before them without making any sound. Wherever they went, the lights turned on as if guided by an invisible hand, and the young woman felt her heart inflamed with a joy she had never experienced before. The passage through the corridors was, in itself, a supernatural event. Catherine realized that that boy was not an ordinary child. His words had the firmness of an adult, but his appearance conveyed angelic purity. He walked ahead of her with confidence, always looking back with a smile that gave her courage. When they finally arrived at the chapel, Catherine felt her heart beat with an almost painful intensity. The door opened as if invisible hands had pushed it, and upon entering, she perceived the chapel illuminated in a way that could not be natural. All the candles were lit, and a deep silence filled the place, as if everything were prepared for a heavenly encounter. It was then that Catherine saw, with the eyes of her soul and of her body, something that would change her story forever. The Virgin Mary appeared seated in the priest's chair, radiant and full of majesty. The young woman felt an irresistible impulse to run toward her and, without fear or hesitation, knelt down and rested her head on Our Lady's knees. This gesture, so intimate and deeply maternal, immediately showed the kind of relationship that the Virgin wished to establish with her, not one of distance, but of tenderness and closeness. Catherine later described that she had never experienced so much peace, so much love, and so much security as in that moment in which she was able to lean on the lap of the Mother of God. The Virgin then began to speak to Catherine with a sweetness that surpassed all human words. She told her about future events, about the mission that she would entrust to the Daughters of Charity, and about the suffering that would befall France in the coming years. Mary spoke to her of revolts, of persecutions, of political and spiritual difficulties that would afflict the country. At the same time, she assured her that God's grace would not be withdrawn, and that, for this, she herself would intervene by sending signs of her maternal presence. Catherine listened attentively to every word, stamping everything in her heart with the certainty that she was not only before a vision, but before a divine calling. At one moment in the conversation, the Virgin expressed sadness over the behavior of many who, although consecrated, were not living their vocation faithfully. She spoke about spiritual lukewarmness, about indifference to the faith, and about the need to pray more intensely. Catherine felt the weight of these words and promised in the silence of her heart to offer her life for the conversion of sinners and for the fidelity of the consecrated. The Virgin, perceiving this offering, smiled at her with tenderness and said that she would entrust great graces to her, but that she would also ask for sacrifices. The young woman, with absolute humility, answered with her obedient gaze that she accepted everything God should want from her. Throughout the apparition, Catherine perceived that the face of the Virgin changed expression as she spoke about future events. At times, Our Lady showed joy, at others, deep sorrow. When she mentioned the spiritual calamities that would come upon France, her eyes filled with tears, as if she carried within herself the sufferings of her children. This detail marked Catherine's soul deeply, and she understood, perhaps for the first time, how much human sin wounds the Immaculate Heart of Mary. The young woman felt called not only to pray more, but to console the Mother of God with her own life of virtue and self-giving. During the vision, Catherine also noticed the constant presence of the boy who had led her to the chapel. Later, she would understand that he was her guardian angel, sent to guide her in a mission of great importance. He remained in silence, but his presence transmitted strength and serenity. Catherine understood that night that she would not be alone in fulfilling the heavenly mission that would be entrusted to her. That encounter with her angel would further strengthen her trust in divine protection during the extraordinary events that were only beginning to unfold. When the apparition came to an end, the Virgin stood up and with a gentle gesture disappeared in the direction of the altar. All the lights in the chapel went out, except for the sanctuary lamp of the Blessed Sacrament, which continued to shine with the same silent intensity as before. Catherine remained there, kneeling for several minutes, unable to move, overcome by a mixture of enchantment, gratitude, and humility. Her soul was completely flooded with light and peace, yet also burdened with the responsibility of the messages she had received. She knew that that night would be remembered for the rest of her life as the beginning of a divine mission. Returning to the dormitory with the help of the angel who had guided her, Catherine realized that her life would never be the same again. From that night on, heaven would open for her a series of supernatural experiences that would culminate in the revelation of the miraculous medal. But before that, the young woman would have to mature spiritually, learn to keep silence about the secrets she had received, and strengthen her soul to endure both the graces and the trials that would come. Catherine fell asleep at dawn, with her heart inflamed with love for God and for Mary, fearing only one thing: not to be faithful to the mission that heaven had entrusted to her. The months that followed the first apparition were lived by Catherine with a mixture of silent expectation and absolute docility. She kept in her heart every word of the Virgin Mary as someone who protects a treasure, aware that it was part of something much greater than she could understand. During that period, her life seemed to follow its normal course: prayers, community work, religious formation, and charitable service. However, her soul remained in a permanent state of spiritual vigilance, for she knew that the Virgin had promised to return. The silence imposed by Mary was a demanding trial, but Catherine embraced it with humility, convinced that obedience would be the necessary foundation for fulfilling with fidelity the heavenly mission that was about to be revealed with greater clarity. It was then that, on the night of November 27th, 1830, while she was saying her prayers in the chapel, Catherine lived the most decisive and luminous moment of her entire life. The apparition began with a gentle movement of light, as if a star had silently descended upon the altar. Little by little, this light intensified, and within it appeared the splendid figure of the Most Holy Virgin, enveloped in an indescribable beauty. Mary was dressed in white and blue, standing upon a globe, symbolizing her universal queenship and her role as mediatrix of divine graces. Under her feet, a serpent lay crushed, representing the total victory of the woman of Genesis over evil. The vision was so majestic that Catherine felt her heart expand in adoration and reverence, seized by the certainty of standing before a mystery that surpassed all human understanding. The Virgin had her hands extended downward, and from her fingers came forth intense and most beautiful rays of light which spread toward the earth. At first, Catherine was amazed, without fully understanding the meaning of that heavenly radiance. Mary then, with a gentle and maternal voice, explained to her that those rays represented the graces that she distributes to her children who ask with confidence. Each luminous beam was a sign of love and mercy poured out upon the world through the intercession of the Mother of God. Catherine watched, spellbound, the depth of the Virgin's gesture, understanding that the mission that would be entrusted to her was directly related to the diffusion of such abundant graces. Catherine noticed, however, that some of the rings on the Virgin's fingers did not emit light. Surprised by this detail, she dared to ask the reason for this absence. The Virgin's answer had a great spiritual and theological impact. Those rings that remained dark represented the graces that are not poured out because people fail to ask for them. This teaching deeply marked the young woman, revealing one of the central points of the devotion that was about to be born: the importance of trust, of prayer, and of openness of heart to receive the graces of God through the intercession of Mary. This revelation showed that the Virgin ardently desires, with unimaginable intensity, to grant blessings to her children, but respects the human freedom to open or not to the divine love. The heavenly vision was not limited to explanations, for the Virgin began to reveal to Catherine concrete details about the mission she wanted to entrust to her. Before the young woman, an oval frame formed around the image of Mary. Within this luminous frame appeared an inscription that would later be recognized throughout the world. "O Mary, conceived without sin, pray for us who have recourse to thee." Catherine understood immediately the power of these words, which proclaimed the dogma of the Immaculate Conception even before its official definition by the Church in 1854. The inscription highlighted the unique role of Mary in the history of salvation and the strength of her maternal intercession, united to the mystery of divine grace. Soon afterward, the vision changed, and Catherine contemplated the reverse side of the medal that was to be struck. She saw a large M intertwined with a cross, a profound symbol of the inseparable union between Jesus and Mary in the work of redemption. Below the M appeared two hearts: the Sacred Heart of Jesus, crowned with thorns, and the Immaculate Heart of Mary, pierced by a sword. These two hearts, placed side by side, represented the redemptive love and reparative suffering that spiritually sustain humanity. 12 stars surrounded the whole, symbolizing both the 12 tribes of Israel and the apostles, reinforcing the universal dimension of the Marian message that was being revealed there. The Virgin then asked Catherine, with great clarity, to have a medal struck exactly as she had seen it. She explained that all those who wore it with confidence would receive abundant graces. Catherine was seized by a profound sense of responsibility, for she knew that she was not facing a simple private devotion, but an explicit request from the Mother of God that would affect millions of people over the centuries. Later, the young woman would describe the weight and greatness of that moment as an irresistible call that came directly from heaven, and that would require from her humility, courage, and absolute fidelity. The mission, however, would not be easy, for Catherine was neither known nor influential within the congregation. She was a humble, silent, and obedient novice, without any position that could facilitate the carrying out of such an extraordinary revelation. Even so, her trust was total. She believed that if Our Lady had entrusted this task to her, then heaven itself would open the necessary paths. At the end of the apparition, the Virgin looked at her with tenderness and reaffirmed that she would always be at her side, guiding each step and strengthening her soul in moments of difficulty. This maternal certainty would be Catherine's support throughout her mission. When the vision dissolved, the light slowly disappeared and the chapel returned to its simple and silent appearance. Catherine remained kneeling for a long time, intoxicated by the splendor she had contemplated and aware that she now bore a secret of immense importance. Her heart was filled with peace, yet also pressed by the great responsibility of faithfully transmitting everything she had seen. She knew, however, that she could not act on her own, for she depended on the authorization of her superiors and her confessors for the medal to be produced according to Mary's request. It was the beginning of a long journey of discernment and obedience. In those silent moments after the vision, Catherine understood that the heavenly mission entrusted to her was not only a gift, but also a call to sacrifice. She would have to endure misunderstandings, doubts, and interior trials, always keeping her identity as seer secret. Her humility, however, did not waver. Catherine offered everything to God, saying in the intimacy of her soul that she would do whatever was necessary for heaven's will to be fulfilled. Thus ended that November night, which would forever transform the history of Marian devotion through the miraculous medal. After the apparitions of November 1830, the soul of Catherine Labouré remained deeply touched by the mission that the Most Holy Virgin had entrusted to her. However, she was fully aware that she could not by herself do anything to have the medal struck. Obedient to heaven's instructions, she decided to entrust everything to the spiritual director of the House of the Daughters of Charity, Father Jean-Marie Aladel. She firmly believed that God would act through the authority of the Church and that no step should be taken without proper discernment. Thus, with humility and docility, she related to the priest every detail of the apparition and faithfully transmitted to him the words of Our Lady. It was a decisive moment, for the fulfillment of the great Marian work desired by heaven now depended on the prudence and faith of that priest. Father Aladel received the messages with respect, but his initial prudence made him hesitate. He feared deceptions, spiritual illusions, or even the fervent imagination of a young novice. Even so, he did not completely dismiss the account, perceiving Catherine's seriousness and sincerity. She was a young woman who showed great spiritual balance, a profound love for religious life, and total detachment from any form of vanity. Nothing in her indicated exaggeration or desire for prominence. Still, the priest decided to pray and reflect before making any decision. This wait, although difficult, was accepted by Catherine with the serenity and patience that characterized her sanctity. Catherine did not pressure, did not insist, and did not argue. She simply waited. This silent and obedient attitude would later be recognized as one of the greatest proofs of her sanctity. Instead of placing herself above authority or insisting on her own experience, she trusted that God would touch the priest's heart at the right time. Meanwhile, she continued her daily life in complete simplicity, serving the poor, caring for the sick, and performing her household tasks with love and humility. The secret she carried in her heart had become her spiritual treasure, guarded with reverence and sacrifice. The prudence of Father Aladel began to give way when events around France confirmed the prophecies given by Our Lady during the first apparition. The Revolution of 1830, political instability, and the spiritual suffering of the French population became evident. All of this made the priest realize that this was not imagination or fantasy, but something truly extraordinary. He then decided to consult his superiors and presented a complete description of the medal as Catherine had related it. After careful analysis, the superiors allowed the medal to be struck, even though they still did not fully understand the grandeur of what was about to happen. Thus, in 1832, the first medals were produced and distributed among the people. At first, it was a simple devotion, practiced with faith by some families and by the Daughters of Charity. However, in a short time, reports of extraordinary graces received by those who wore it with confidence began to appear. Healing from diseases, sudden conversions, protection in physical dangers, profound spiritual deliverances, all of this began to multiply in such an expressive way that people began to call the object the Miraculous Medal. The title was not created by the Church, but by the people themselves, moved by gratitude for the visible graces they received daily. The growth of the devotion was so rapid and so astonishing that it caused admiration, even among those who had previously doubted the authenticity of the revelations. In just a few years, hundreds of thousands of medals had been distributed, not only in France, but in several countries in Europe. The news of the graces spread quickly, as if an invisible force were carrying each medal to the heart of those who most needed it. The poor, above all, embraced this devotion with love, recognizing that Mary showed herself to be a solicitous mother, attentive to the sufferings of her children and generous in her interventions. It was the Virgin of Graces manifesting herself in all her tenderness and power. One of the episodes that most contributed to the worldwide diffusion of the medal was the so-called Miracle of the Rue du Bac, when countless people witnessed unexpected healings and impressive conversions after praying before the medal or wearing it with confidence. Among the most famous testimonies is that of the conversion of Alphonse Ratibon, an unbelieving Jew who, upon wearing the medal at the insistence of a friend, had an apparition of the Virgin Mary in the church of Sant'Andrea delle Frate in Rome. His life changed completely from that encounter onward, and he became a priest and a great promoter of the devotion. The sudden and profound conversion of this man shook theologians, skeptics, and even members of the ecclesiastical hierarchy, serving as a living proof of the power of Mary's intercession through the miraculous medal. While the devotion spread with extraordinary strength, Catherine remained completely hidden. No one knew that she was the seer chosen by the Virgin. She lived her mission in a silent way, never revealing her identity and keeping in her heart the secret that Our Lady had entrusted to her. Her fellow sisters in community saw her as an ordinary religious, dedicated to the simplest and heaviest tasks, without distinction or privileges. Catherine's radical humility made her life even more luminous before God. She preferred to remain hidden, offering every sacrifice for the conversion of souls and for the glory of the Mother of God. Although she remained in anonymity, Catherine quietly rejoiced in the flourishing of the devotion to the miraculous medal. Every testimony of healing, every conversion, every miracle was for her a reason for profound thanksgiving. Her heart rejoiced not out of pride, but because she saw that the will of the Virgin was being fulfilled exactly as she had promised. Catherine understood that the medal was not a magical object, but a powerful sacramental that led the faithful to God through the maternal intercession of Mary. The more the devotion spread, the more Catherine's desire grew to remain in silence and disappear from the eyes of the world. Even after years in which no one knew of her mission, Catherine never ceased to pray for the Church, for France, and for all those who wore the medal. She carried in her heart the conviction that the miraculous medal was a divine work, destined to strengthen Christians in times of spiritual trial. She also knew that, along with the graces, many battles would come. The advance of rationalism, of religious indifference, and of ideologies contrary to the faith. Therefore, she offered her life daily in silent sacrifice, trusting that Mary would continue to pour out her graces upon the world as long as there were those who prayed with faith. Thus, the diffusion of the miraculous medal not only transformed popular spirituality in the 19th century, but also prepared the way for a deeper Marian love that endures to this day. All of this began with a simple, silent, humble young woman, hidden from the eyes of the world, yet totally transparent before the eyes of God. Catherine Labouré was the chosen instrument to bring to the world one of the greatest manifestations of divine grace through the Virgin Mary, becoming, even without being seen, one of the most important Marian figures in the history of the Church. Even while the miraculous medal spread throughout the world and transformed countless lives, the existence of Catherine Labouré remained completely silent, hidden from the eyes of the public and even from her own fellow sisters in community. Our Lady had made it clear from the beginning that she should remain anonymous, and Catherine embraced this order with such deep obedience that it still moves us today. She did not desire recognition, did not seek glory, and did not want to be seen as someone special. Her entire life was driven by a single purpose: to fulfill with humility and perfection the will of God manifested through the Most Holy Mother. Thus, while millions of medals were being distributed throughout the whole world, the seer chosen by Mary continued washing dishes, making beds, caring for the poorest, and living her vocation in such an ordinary way that no one suspected her extraordinary mission. Catherine's life in the convent was marked by an intense rhythm of physical work and responsibility. She served for more than 40 years in the hospice of Enghien, where she dedicated herself to caring for the elderly, the poor, and the abandoned. The tasks were heavy, required continuous effort, and brought no human recognition. She cleaned wounds, served meals, dressed sores, carried debilitated people, and spent long hours in work that often demanded strength and physical endurance. Even so, she never showed signs of fatigue or irritation. Her fellow sisters in community testified that Catherine always had a serene expression, radiating peace and charity as if each gesture were offered directly to God. Her life thus became a true living sacrifice, filled with love and silent self-giving. Catherine's heart was profoundly Eucharistic. Whenever she could, she remained in silent adoration before the Blessed Sacrament. There, she found strength to face the difficulties of the day and renewed her total self-offering to service. It was common to find her in spare moments, prostrate in silent prayer, conversing with God as one speaks with an intimate friend. She did not need elaborate words or extraordinary practices. Her prayer was simple, pure, and deep, made with a heart totally turned toward the Lord. Many later testimonies recount that when Catherine prayed, there was around her an atmosphere of impressive peace, as if her spirit already partly lived in heaven. Her devotion to the Virgin Mary was equally intense, but discreet. Catherine never told anyone about her visions, even when some sisters perceived that she had an uncommon spiritual sensitivity. She kept in her heart, with an almost sacred silence, every word that the Mother of God had entrusted to her. Whenever she saw a medal, although she kept a serene expression, her heart was filled with gratitude and joy, for she recognized in that small object the perfect fulfillment of the mission she had received. In the intimacy of her soul, Catherine offered every grace poured out through the medal as a praise to the Most Holy Virgin, who wished to reach the sufferings and needs of her children scattered throughout the world. Despite her evident holiness, Catherine faced many interior trials. Not always did her superiors understand her silent attitudes, and at times she was subjected to humiliations, criticisms, and harsh demands. In certain moments, she was not understood, and some religious judged her severely without knowing her true mission. Catherine, however, never retaliated or justified herself. She accepted everything with humility, offering each difficulty as reparation for sinners and as an act of love to the Virgin Mary. This heroic silence, maintained throughout her life, became one of the pillars of her sanctity and a luminous example of evangelical obedience. Another impressive aspect of her life was her extraordinary ability to see Christ in the poor. For Catherine, every person in need was a concrete opportunity to serve Jesus. She treated the elderly and the sick with an almost maternal tenderness, speaking with them, cleaning their wounds with love, holding their hands, and consoling their spiritual pains. Her words were few, but filled with a kindness that comforted even the most desperate. Many of the poor she cared for did not know her name, but said that sister had hands of an angel. Catherine, however, did not let herself be influenced by praise. She did everything in secret, fleeing from any kind of human recognition. Her life was also marked by long years of physical suffering. The exhausting work, sleepless nights, the weight of age and illnesses gradually weakened her body. Even so, she never asked to be excused from her duties nor sought comforts. She offered everything to God as a sacrifice for sinners and for the church. This silent generosity made her life acquire an immense spiritual value before God, who transforms every humble work into abundant grace. Catherine understood the divine logic. The greatest treasures of faith are not found under spotlights, but in anonymous sacrifices and hidden renunciations that only God sees. Over the years, Catherine continued to receive interior inspirations and spiritual consolations, but she never again had an apparition of the Virgin like those of 1830. This, however, did not diminish her faith or her love. On the contrary, she understood that her mission had been fulfilled in those revelations and that her task now was to live them, protect them, and offer them to the world through obedience. Her silence was so sacred that for decades no one suspected that she had experienced something so extraordinary. The medals were being produced by the thousands and distributed throughout the entire world, transforming lives and granting graces, while the humble Catherine swept corridors, washed clothes, and cared for the poor without ever lifting her eyes to seek recognition. The greatness of Catherine lay precisely in the fact that the greater the devotion to the miraculous medal became, the more she hid herself. The glory that the world offered passed far from her heart, for she knew that everything came exclusively from Mary and from God. Catherine was only an instrument, a silent servant who had given her entire life to the divine will. Her soul lived in a profound state of union with God, sustained by humility, charity, and absolute trust in divine mercy. Her silent witness became one of the most beautiful expressions of consecrated life, an existence hidden yet totally luminous before God's gaze. Thus, while the world recognized the miraculous power of the medal, Catherine Labouré remained unknown, living each day as a pure and silent offering to heaven. Her life was a living gospel, written not with words, but with small and constant actions that sprang from a heart totally consecrated. After decades of humble service, she was about to complete her earthly journey, and the secret guarded for so many years would finally be revealed, not out of vanity, but so that the Church might officially recognize the authenticity of the extraordinary mission that God had entrusted to her since her youth. After decades of living in the deepest humility and anonymity, Catherine Labouré had already silently fulfilled the grand mission that heaven had entrusted to her. She observed, with discreet interior joy, the continuous expansion of the devotion to the miraculous medal throughout the world, while remaining totally hidden within the congregation of the Daughters of Charity. However, as her life advanced and her body began to show evident signs of wear, Providence was preparing the final chapters of her mission. The secret she had faithfully guarded throughout her life was about to be finally revealed, not by her own initiative, for she would never dare to do so, but by the very need of the Church to officially recognize the origin of the devotion that had transformed so many souls over the years. As Catherine grew older, the sisters in community noticed her almost supernatural serenity. Even with constant pains, she never complained. Her face maintained an expression of peace, as if her soul were always contemplating the face of God. Many said there was something mysterious about that simple sister who never stood out, but who radiated a silent and profound holiness. When her strength began to diminish more evidently, she humbly asked to remain close to her community and to the poor, refusing any privilege. Her desire was simple: to die as she had lived, serving and offering everything to God. Before her death, however, the secret of the apparitions needed to be revealed. It was not for vanity or personal need, but because the Church needed to know the identity of the seer. It was important for the process of authentication of the devotion and for the spiritual formation of future generations of the faithful. Thus, moved by obedience and divine inspiration, Catherine told everything to her confessor and superior, that she was the young woman chosen by the Virgin Mary to transmit the miraculous medal to the world. When he heard her testimony, he was deeply moved, for he now understood the immeasurable value of that hidden life. Everything he had suspected over the years, the heroic humility, the sacred silence, the unshakable gentleness, fit perfectly with the extraordinary mission she was finally revealing. The revelation surprised everyone, including the sisters who had lived with Catherine for decades. Many of them found it hard to believe that that silent and obedient woman who did the simplest and heaviest work was precisely the seer of the apparitions of 1830. However, the more they reflected on her life, the more they understood that it made perfect sense. Catherine's luminous sanctity lay precisely in her silence, in her humility, and in her deep desire to disappear so that the glory might belong only to God and to the Virgin Mary. Her revelation, therefore, far from exalting her image, only made even clearer the spiritual value of her hidden life. In the last days of her life, Catherine received from God special graces of consolation and interior peace. Despite her weakened body, she remained spiritually strong, aware that her mission on earth was coming to an end. When her pains increased, she offered everything for the conversion of sinners and for the fidelity of the consecrated. The nearness of her death did not cause her fear. On the contrary, she awaited with gentle hope the moment of meeting in heaven the most holy Virgin, to whom she had dedicated every step of her existence. Her total surrender to God's will was a living testimony of perfect and unconditional love. On December 31st, 1876, Catherine Labouré surrendered her soul to God at 70 years of age. Her death was serene, surrounded by an atmosphere of peace that impressed all the sisters present. It was as if heaven had descended into that simple room to receive the soul of the faithful servant who had fulfilled her mission with perfection. The sisters testified that, at the moment of her passing, her face seemed illuminated by a gentle light, an expression of joy and rest that confirmed her profound union with God. Catherine's death was not a moment of sorrow, but of spiritual triumph. Soon after her death, the news of her identity as seer spread rapidly. The devotion to the miraculous medal, which was already immense, became even more respected and loved by the faithful, who understood that Our Lady had chosen a humble and hidden soul to accomplish such a grand work. Catherine had not sought fame or recognition, but God, in His wisdom, decided to reveal to the world the purity of her mission so that her life might become an example of humility, obedience, and unconditional love for the Mother of God. Her story began to be known and studied by theologians, priests, and faithful from various parts of the world. With the passing of time, countless miracles and graces attributed to Catherine's intercession began to appear. People who asked for her help experienced healings, conversions, and impressive spiritual consolations. The Church, attentive to these testimonies, began a formal process of investigation into her life, her virtues, and her mission. What they found was an extraordinary sanctity, built not on great public deeds, but on perfect fidelity in small things, on a hidden life of service, and on total surrender to the divine will. Catherine became a luminous model for all Christians, especially for the consecrated and for those who serve the poorest. In 1933, the Church officially recognized her sanctity and proclaimed Catherine Labouré a saint, raising her life and mission to the universal altar. Her body, when exhumed, was found incorrupt, as a visible sign of the divine grace that had accompanied her throughout her life. Today, it rests in the chapel of the Miraculous Medal on the Rue du Bac in Paris, the very place where the Virgin visited her and entrusted to her the mission that would transform the world. Thousands of pilgrims visit this place every year, receiving graces and rediscovering the faith through the intercession of that humble daughter of charity. The life of St. Catherine Labouré is a powerful testimony that God chooses simple instruments to accomplish extraordinary works. Her silent humility, her perfect obedience, and her deep love for the Virgin Mary continue to inspire millions of people throughout the world. St. Catherine reminds us that true spiritual greatness does not lie in visibility, but in hidden sacrifice, not in human recognition, but in silent fidelity to God's call. Her example crosses the centuries as an invitation to holiness lived in small things, to full trust in Mary, and to total abandonment into the hands of God. The legacy of St. Catherine Labouré extends far beyond her earthly life. Although she lived in the deepest humility, her supernatural mission remains alive and effective in the Church to this day. The Miraculous medal, which was born from the apparitions of the Virgin Mary on the Rue du Bac, continues to be one of the most widespread and most beloved sacramentals in all Catholic devotion. Millions of people on every continent wear the medal on their chest as a sign of protection, consolation, hope, and trust in the maternal intercession of Mary. This shows that the mission entrusted to Catherine was not only for her time, but for all future generations who continue to receive abundant graces through this heavenly gift. As we reflect on her life, we realize that Catherine embodies perfectly the evangelical call to hidden holiness. In a world that values recognition, visibility, and fame, she offers us the opposite witness, that of spiritual greatness that grows in silence, in obedience, and in humble service. Her holiness did not manifest itself through public speeches or extraordinary deeds before men, but through fidelity to the small daily tasks carried out with love and offered to God. It is this resplendent simplicity that reminds us that holiness is within everyone's reach, including those who live apparently ordinary lives invisible to the eyes of the world. The Miraculous medal, a direct fruit of her obedience, has become an instrument of conversion for people of all ages and cultures. In hospitals, prisons, battlefields, and poor homes, the history of the medal intertwines with extraordinary testimonies of healings and spiritual renewal. Many people report having found relief in their anguish simply by holding the medal with faith, while others say they found the courage to start anew after years of interior suffering. Such testimonies reveal that what Our Lady promised Catherine, abundant graces for those who turn to her, continues to be faithfully fulfilled, like a river of mercy that does not cease to pour over the world. The theological meaning of the medal is equally profound. It reminds us of central truths of the Catholic faith: the Immaculate Conception of Mary, her powerful intercession, her inseparable union with Christ, symbolized by the M intertwined with the cross, and the importance of the two hearts, the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the Immaculate Heart of Mary. These elements, present on the medal by direct instruction from heaven, compose a true catechesis in metal, silently teaching what many Christians need to remember in times of spiritual confusion. In this way, Catherine's mission also remains alive in the transmission of true doctrine and in the preservation of the Catholic faith in the face of the storms of the modern world. The witness of St. Catherine Labouré also sheds light on consecrated life and on all those who are called to service. Her absolute obedience, her radical humility, and her love for the poor show that the true greatness of religious life is not found in extraordinary apparitions, but in daily self-giving to those most in need. Catherine became a model for all the daughters of charity, who to this day walk the same corridors, serve in the same hospitals, and follow in the footsteps of Saint Vincent de Paul with dedication to the bodily and spiritual service of the poor. She shows that concrete charity is a direct extension of divine grace, and that serving one's neighbor is one of the most sublime forms of love for God. Her life also speaks in a profound way to the hearts of lay people. At a time when many seek extraordinary signs, Catherine teaches us that God also acts in silence, in simplicity, and in daily life. She reminds us that holiness does not depend on visions, but on fidelity to daily duty, on constant prayer, and on the interior disposition to do God's will, even when it is difficult or incomprehensible. This teaching remains extremely timely, especially in a world marked by haste, noise, and distraction, in which many seek quick answers but forget the value of spiritual constancy. Beyond the spiritual dimension, the legacy of St. Catherine Labouré remains alive in the heart of the Church through her incorruptibility. Her body, miraculously preserved from natural decay, rests in the chapel of the Miraculous Medal in Paris, where millions of pilgrims visit her tomb every year. Before that silent body, which remains intact as a visible sign of divine grace, many of the faithful kneel to give thanks, to ask, and to renew their trust in God and in Our Lady. The simple sight of that incorrupt body is a silent preaching on the faithfulness of God, on Catherine's purity, and on the eternity of the mission that was entrusted to her. The spirituality of St. Catherine Labouré is deeply linked to the mystery of humility. In a world increasingly inclined to pride, self-promotion, and individualism, Catherine appears as a luminous star pointing to the opposite path, that of spiritual smallness. She teaches us that true strength does not lie in showing oneself, but in allowing God to appear. Not in seeking honors, but in embracing hiddenness, not in winning applause, but in loving silently. Her life is an echo of Mary's words in the Magnificat. He has looked upon the humility of his servant. Catherine was that servant, and God exalted her not for what she did for herself, but for what she did for him. The modern world, so thirsty for peace and so wounded by spiritual crises, continues to find in the Miraculous Medal a concrete sign of Mary's maternal presence. In moments of pain, wars, pandemics, and uncertainty, many people turn to her with renewed faith. And just as promised to Catherine, Mary continues to pour out graces upon those who turn to her intercession. Catherine's mission, therefore, did not end with her death. It remains alive whenever an afflicted child holds a medal with hope and pronounces the words, "O Mary conceived without sin, pray for us who have recourse to thee." Thus, the legacy of St. Catherine Labouré remains as a beacon in the heart of the Church. Her hidden life, her perfect obedience, her deep union with Mary, and her universal mission make her one of the great saints of Marian devotion. Catherine's story invites us to place our full trust in the Most Holy Virgin, to seek God's grace with humility, and to live each day with a silent love capable of transforming the world without anyone noticing. Her witness echoes through the centuries as a living message of faith, hope, and charity, and her intercession continues to accompany all those who, with confidence, wear the miraculous medal as a sign of love and protection from the Mother of God.